Hi, I'm Nicole Dyer from ABC Gold Coast and the proud ambassador of Gold Coast Open House. We hope you enjoy this recording from our 2022 Open House Talks program.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I can't believe we're about to start about 2 minutes ahead of schedule. This is fantastic. So thank you very much for being our largest or our sold-out audience for our third panel discussion as part of Gold Coast Open House. My name is Philip Folland and I'm a committee member of Gold Coast Open House, and it's my great pleasure to be able to introduce tonight's panel discussion, Good Design Without Deep Pockets. Just in first though, in the spirit of reconciliation, Gold Coast Open House acknowledges the traditional custodians of country across Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to the elders past, present, and we extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples today. For those of you who've only just heard of Gold Coast Open House, Gold Coast Open House is part of a worldwide architecture festival which started in London exactly 30 years ago this year. It was started by architect Victoria Thornton. And the aim of Gold Coast Open House is to engage the general public in dialogue with architecture and architects through the promotion of contemporary and historical architecture and design in our city. But really it's about talking about the stories that underpin the great places and spaces that we may be quite indifferent to initially, but once we've heard the stories about these places, we're no longer indifferent to what makes our city quite special. And an engaged public is a public that can defend what's special about their city. Now, Gold Coast Open House is actually a not-for-profit organisation and it relies solely on volunteers and sponsors. Now, we don't expect you to have to be a sponsor, but we'd love you if you've got the opportunity to be a volunteer, perhaps next year, and to share in the meantime your experiences on social media and with friends, and by participating like you are tonight in this program. So it's a big welcome to you, as I said, our biggest audience in terms of our panel discussions. The first, some housekeeping. If there's a fire or you need to get out of the place, just follow the green wherever they are, just go to your left, I think might be safest. And please switch your phones to silent. To moderate this panel discussion tonight, we have Amy Degenhart, who is probably one of the busiest architects around, not only running her own architectural practice, she is currently the Queensland President of the Australian Institute of Architects. And we really appreciate you being able to spend time with us tonight. We got you onto the committee this year. We thought you had nothing to do, and then of course you became president as well. So just to make sure you do stay busy. And Amy, with her husband, Martin Shedd, have founded a company, Degenhartshedd Architects. And really that practice has, over many, many years, perhaps 30 years or so, has done many very modest, quite tiny projects, and ones that many architects might not have taken great interest in doing. But they've been projects which have required incredible ingenuity, incredible nimbleness as an architect, and Amy brings all of those skills to architecture, which is quite relevant to our topic tonight. So would you welcome Amy to introduce a fantastic panel talking about not affordable architecture, but good design without deep pockets. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Philip. Everything working okay with the mic? All right. It's my great pleasure to introduce these four architects sitting to my side. Firstly, Matt Eagle. Matthew is director and founder of architecture studio ME and teacher at the Abedian School of Architecture, Bond University on the Gold Coast. Matthew established ME in 2013. It's based at Juragal, Burleigh Heads, on the lands of the Kumberi people and also of the Yugambeh language group. ME has developed a portfolio of widely published and awarded projects, And born in the Gold Coast, Matthew has an innate understanding of the local environment, history and climate, but he's also been overseas, the UK, Netherlands, and has a deep understanding and appreciation for quality urban settings. Thank you, Matt, for being here. And Luke. We now introduce Luke Rollinson, Creative Positive Futures. Luke is a registered architect in Queensland, New South Wales and Northern Territory. After practicing abroad on a large-scale civic projects, he found his focus on social impact. He often employs off-site manufacturing pathways to develop more job outcomes for those most in need. It is those projects that can be built by people who he's most inspired by. The people who can eventually build them and use them. He contributes to the policy making around jobs and housing by embedding learnings from better design, and through some of his NGOs, Luke assists the development of social housing, domestic violence, safe houses, transitional housing, and places that allow for respite and recovery for families suffering from trauma. And then we actually also have Jeremy Salmon and Jeremy Salmon Architects. Jeremy Salmon has been the principal of Jeremy Salmon Architects since 1993. The practice focuses on new houses and renovations and has an impressive body of work predominantly located in southeast Queensland. Projects in northern Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria have also been completed. Jeremy's commitment to accessible, sustainable solutions that can be enjoyed by the residents for many years has been recognised through architectural commendations and the Harry Marks Award for Sustainable Architecture. Our current motivation of their practice is maximum transformation from minimum change. Very good, and welcome, Jeremy. And finally, we have Dr. Kirsty Volz, and she is of Toussaint and Volz Design. Dr. Kirsty Volz is a lecturer in architecture at the Queensland University of Technology, and she is co-director of design and architectural practice, Toussaint and Volz Design. Kirsty is a passionate advocate for the role that architects have to play in improving the standard of Australian housing through both her research and architectural practice. Kirsty is keenly developing new and innovative models for housing design in Australia. I might have taken a little bit longer on the intros than I was supposed to, according to Philip, but we did get started a tad early, and these guys are really superstars and heroes of mine. So I just did want to indulge in a little bit of background on them. Now, let's start our panel discussion. The framework of the discussion was kind of started with the idea that engaging an architect is sometimes seen as something that only a lot of money can buy. But there are many ways to cost-effectively build or renovate your home without resorting to off-the-shelf, do-it-yourself solutions that are never quite right. In this open house talk session, our panel of architects will be talking about the backyard extensions, the sloping sites, narrow lots, prefabricated homes, SOHOs or small office, home office, ugly ducklings, stuck housing, multi-gen houses, share houses, micro dwellings, affordable homes, all that they have designed for people not necessarily with deep pockets. Where would homeowners who care about getting it right best invest their money to create long-lasting, fit-for-purpose home? And how can architects bring design, ingenuity, innovation, and insight to projects without breaking the bank? The issue of architecture that is seen as expensive and elitist, but it doesn't have to be. And it doesn't have to be viewed that way. The open house event is an opportunity that enables a lot of people to experience good design and affordable residential architecture. Project homes are not the only option. Our national president for the Institute of Architects, Shannon Battison, is determined to change this and to make our profession more relevant. Her words, "I want to smash the image that architecture is only for the elite," are a great segue to my question to each of our panelists, and that is for them to each take a few minutes to share with you or how they would like to smash that image that architecture is just for the elite and deliver good design without deep pockets, and naturally in 3 to 5 minutes or less, and a lot less than me. So I start with Matthew and we'll continue on to Luke and ending with Kirsty. Thanks, Matthew.
Thanks. So that's why I had to sit first. I got first position, so damn. Yeah, look, it's a real challenge, I think, to kind of present to clients an image that, I mean, we have sort of persona that, we can only be for people who have money or have a whole lot of money. But I think there's a whole lot of kind of strategies and kind of wealth of knowledge that we can bring to the table. And I mean, from our experience, a lot of our clients are relatively young people with young families and not with deep pockets. And it's really kind of developing some strategies for them that'll help, so I suppose, maximise the way in which they live, the ways in which they can change over time with their families and enable that, whether that's kids growing up, grandparents moving in, something else to help, or work from home, which we've seen a lot of late. So enabling that kind of adaptability to see the home grow. And I suppose we're really fortunate to work with clients who really care about this place too, which is also really important, and to, I suppose, have a long-term view around their kind of the place in which they live, not a short-term speculative view. So that's where the space in which we work, and we find that's really important, having that long-term kind of view over the places in which they live.
Very good point. And Luke?
I think I've got a response to this that makes some sense. Hopefully it does. I came from a background working with higher end projects. I worked with Philip Folland, who's in the room. Early days, I was very blessed to see the little impacts that you can make to make a really big difference to a space, and how amazing those places can be at different times of year, and using spaces differently. And working with a client often can be just about how you use the existing spaces very differently. I went on to work on really big civic projects which had seemingly endless budgets and were what I saw as an economic black hole for community. But what I started to hear from the big consulting companies that looked at architects and what we did in the community was those weren't an economic black hole or a big capital works. Within a year or two, they would be a investment in the community, so much so that it would be worth every cent of that capital and more, and start paying back. And I didn't really understand that model. And as I developed my own sort of practice, I guess, and worked with other builders that were local again and back in Australia, I started to apply some of that thinking to affordable housing, domestic violence safe houses, little gymnasiums or yoga studios for people who have had trauma to recover from domestic violence, things like that. And they had very limited budgets, or we had to come up with the money ourselves. So we had to start to get creative about what is the value we're really offering. And in terms of those spaces, it's that good design element for sure, but it's also thinking about how we procure buildings and what we're really doing. A building is not just this little thing on its own. We're building communities as we do it. So what we started to look at is the whole economic model. So the triple bottom line economics you might hear about, where you've got the environment we're focused on a lot, and you hear a lot about that. And good spaces, good design, and a good price, and working to a budget at a time. But then there's also this social impact element, which we're heavily focused on now. We run an organisation which is a foundation, which as a builder is a very hard thing to do. It's almost impossible to get registered as one, and then you've got to build your own capital behind it. And the reason we do that is to control projects, and the reason we do that is not so we can make sure architects get jobs, because I don't really care about that. More focused on what is a new immigrant called Mohanand, who comes to a country and doesn't get a chance for a job because of his name. We'll give him a chance, and we'll give him experience, and at the end of that he can go on to other careers somewhere else. And what we find is we get some amazing outcomes with that, and we can also work with some local kids who just, they're probably like me, a bit wayward, and they just needed a bit of a hand along the way somewhere. And I remember the people who helped me along the way, and rather than stealing the neighbour's car, they go and do something else and end up in architecture. And to see those little journeys, I see a building, but I see all those stories and narratives. And for me, that's placemaking. But just recently, we've also, as architects, been developing our economic modelling, because we need to prove this to Treasury to get the funding to do the work anyway. So we've been doing a lot of that, which is, it's space making, it's good design, but it's all about the procurement of a building and what it creates as a better community. So that's my idea.
Thanks, Luke. Jeremy?
What I think when people think about architects and the whole idea that we only do this glamorous stuff and it costs a lot of money, is because, of course, the things that are shown that architects do are the really beautiful stuff that was up on the screen before, because that's what's photogenic and what people want to see. But that's great, but it's not really what architects do. And I think that having done it for a long time, that what we really do is make sense of what people want. And we really look at buildings and what you can do with them. And if you want to get a lot out of an architect, then you need to start thinking not so much about, I want the most glamorous house in the street. I want the house that I want to live in, and that's the best thing. And that's where you start from, rather than some sort of imagery about what an architect can do for you. And that's what we can really offer. And it's a complex process. And one of the things we do, when you work with a client, it's almost like a mini architectural training. At the end of the job, people always say it's a bit difficult when they go to see their friends' houses because they want to critique just why that's there or that's there. Or that's there. And so what an architect can do for you at all different levels is look at those things. So you might even... Architects give a lot of community help. Every time I'm at a barbecue, people ask me about things and what they should do and so forth. And an architect can help you at that level, as well as helping you right through a contract documentation and design and helping you through a building contract. But we can offer a lot of value. And I think that's the side of architecture that people don't really see until they actually work with an architect. And it's something that I think we need to promote more, which is, I think, where the president of the Institute is coming from. Yeah.
Thanks, Jimmy. Kirsty.
Architects are incredibly creative, intelligent, and operators. And I'm huge fans of everyone here up on the stage tonight. And I think that there are things that we can talk about with design and housing that go beyond the individual home. And we really need to think about redesigning the whole housing market, because at the moment we're kind of stuck in this phase where I'm sure we've all had clients where we've had to do some creative accounting on plans so that they can get finance for their projects. You know, an extra bedroom adds this many $1,000s to a house value, or an extra car accommodation, or an extra bathroom. And it's sort of a sad way to measure value of a house, by the number of bathrooms, bedrooms, and car accommodation. And what my work as an academic, what I'm interested in, is collecting evidence on the other dimensions of value to do with housing. So we know that good quality housing leads to good health outcomes. That in fact, if we all live in good quality housing, we save our health and our hospitals money, because we've got good quality housing. With this evidence for that. But there's also perhaps evidence that's a bit harder to collect around social value, like what does it mean to know your neighbour? And when we talk about things like climate resilience, it's not just about having hard finishes for flood. Climate resilience is all about knowing your neighbour, so that when you're in trouble, there's someone there to help you. And good architecture facilitates all those really important social networks. So the stuff that I'm kind of interested in is, how do we kind of shift the way we value housing so we can redesign the whole housing market? Because where we are at the moment in Australia, it's not that people can't afford architectural homes, people can't actually afford housing, full stop. And that whole housing market needs to dramatically change.
No, that's a good perspective. But we're actually going to get back to that, I think. I might actually pop to Jeremy with a couple of pointed questions. In your intro to me, you mentioned, don't forget, where the sun is. And I also appreciated that you worked with some more sustainable designs. And with the regulation changes now going to 7 stars, would you maybe expand on that for us, for the audience, for a few minutes?
Yes. It's important to recognise that sustainability is a very complex concept. It's not just using recycled materials or good planning, or it's a whole suite of ideas about how a building's going to last, how you're going to maintain it. We'll touch on some other things later on about the life of the building. If it's going to be a sustainable building, it's got to work for people now and people in the future and the changes that happen. So it's a very complicated thing. But I grew up with a father who was a fairly hard-nosed mid-century modernist architect, and I spent a lot of my childhood having rooms explained to me and why they were in the wrong place, or where the light was coming from the wrong place, or taken outside and shown a line of the shadow from an awning on the north wall of a building in the middle of December and said that's where it should be. So he was thinking about that then, but he was also a child of the Depression, and he was fiercely careful about materials and not wasting materials and so forth. And what I'm saying is, he was a very sustainable architect from a long time ago. Sustainability is not a new concept. Sustainable design is just good design. And we've all, sat uncomfortably in a gloomy, cold room in winter, or fried on a western deck in an afternoon because things are around the wrong way. And to make all of those things work and not to ignore the sun is a really important thing. But the complexities of that, if you've got a view to the west, you can't ignore that. If you've got a site that's facing a different way, there's a whole series of things that have to be put together. And architects are uniquely talented in that ability to look at how those materials go together, how the place, how that particular site works, how you work with a builder, how the regulations work. We have a huge amount of knowledge, and that's what our skill is, to put all of those things together and still make sure you're facing the right way, still making sure that in the morning when you get up to make a cup of tea, it's a pleasant place to be. You've got to bring everything together, and it's not just a coincidence when that happens. I mean, occasionally maybe it might just happen that way, but most of the time, I don't think people realise that a house can be that much better because you get all of those things working. And I think, to me, that's what sustainability is all about.
Because overthrown into that a way in which people live, and people live in different ways as well. We have clients that love the Western sun, love sitting out in cooking in summertime, and and that's totally fine. But that you got.
I have had clients say they like gloomy.
That's right. That too. Yeah. And I think that kind of, as part of our processes, where we really have a really deep conversation with our clients in the briefing process to understand, all right, what it is, how do you live, what are the ways in which you use spaces. It's not a conversation about, here's a Pinterest board, here's some tiles that we love. We try and kind of sway away from that to talk about really what it is that you enjoy, how do you enjoy living, and also talk about some of the stories and anecdotes of how they've grown up. I know there was a space, the attic in my grandma's place. It was amazing. We used to play up there as kids, or travels. So then we can connect to those sorts of experiences to make it about the client. And again, it comes back to that kind of long-term approach to what it is that they value, as opposed to what a real estate agent or someone else, no offence, but tells you what you have to have. But that can be tricky to navigate in the current kind of system. Yeah.
Well, talking about navigating that, there's one sentence that stuck out for me that you wrote, and that was that, negotiating a good contract for the largest investment of your life. I mean, that's exactly right. It's a contract. The drawings, the design is a contract, and that can't be underestimated from the value of getting the best out of the dollar as well.
Yeah, 100%. And that's as architects, understanding that process of what we can do, the services we can offer, and it's not just a drawing on a page. Here, builder, please build it.
Negotiating is the value proposition of weighing up the good and the bad and the value of that, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And also, Luke, you mentioned a lot about co-housing in the information you sent through. I'm particularly passionate about that concept, and I think because of affordability, a lot of us have thought or are thinking about co-housing. Maybe you could expand on some examples or anecdotes of that.
Yes, I thought about this when you prepped me before about co-housing. Unfortunately, I don't feel like we're there yet in Australia in terms of the models that we were taught and we've researched for the last 25, 30, 40 years. We see more and better examples from Europe, and when we get immigrant architects from anywhere else, we seem to get a better outcome. I think, and we get taught by these architects as well through universities, and we have these aspirations, but it's again coming back to the economics of building and construction. I think the economic models and where we're heading now with different models like Nightingale and different models we're working with social housing providers or housing providers generally, or private dwelling owners where they want to do other dwellings as a part of and build a community around things. We've recently done a project where we didn't quite get there in terms of a co-housing element, but we certainly did a co-design with a client that could end up being something like that. And the built form could just easily be inhabited in a co-design kind of co-housing kind of way. Common buildings, things like that. We've been working a lot with the classes and trying to work as we go with certifiers to make sure it makes sense to them that the fire risks are kept low so that we can do them in very economical ways. It's actually an incredibly difficult thing to do. So the ownership models, the equity models, the capital models, the procurement models, and then how we build these things inside of reasonably tight legislation in Australia, which doesn't actually have a model for this. You've got different classes of building in the one thing. And sometimes they're one building, sometimes they're multiple buildings. The project we did with 20 buildings recently, which could have been done like this, ended up as an ecotourism resort. But so the bent we put on it anyway, and we just brought along 30 people that never had a job before and just kept getting rejections. I think one of the kids there had been rejected 300 times. And, we just, my job then was just go, well, yeah, we want to make a fancy resort, but, how can I make this interesting for me? And so we got these kids jobs, and they, the first interview was like, they couldn't shake your hand, couldn't look in the eye, they're totally devastated, really. And then 2 weeks later, they're dragging you around, showing this fancy little place that looks like a jewelry box, not a house. It's like pretty amazing, to go from no skill to doing that sort of building. So for me, there's a lot of little ways you can turn every project into something good, even if it doesn't quite get there, But yeah, that's certainly a model that we're passionate about. And we're seeing a lot more with domestic violence housing legislation. We're using in Queensland to get little secondary dwellings behind, or bigger secondary dwellings than we really should get, behind existing houses, to really just make better density of housing that people have already got, and they want to just gift it to people that they know they need. What asset have you got that you can share, and that sharing economy idea? And how do we fund those things, and working with a bigger community to make that happen. And in the process, we've been working on ways to make zero waste projects, which benefit as well, because you start to think about better design, better documentation. You can basically design the waste in and the waste out, and reduce the spaces you need as well, such that if we're doing affordable housing or co-housing or an ecotourism resort, we're just using less and getting more, and whether that's a building or spaces or social outcomes.
Thanks. Now, Kirsty, the idea of co-housing aligns very nicely with your thoughts about community and neighbourhood, because sometimes co-housing is the only way to sort of put some new housing into a neighbourhood. And you seem pretty passionate about some of the things you're going to say about just rewriting the whole housing market. So would you like to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I think when we think about housing as ownership, that's a very privileged model, and it's not something that is created that isn't unsupported. There's a social structure that has allowed for people to individually own houses. And so I think there's a way of approaching that where, and perhaps as a bigger conversation, it's something we need developers to also take a mindset, because I know examples of people on this panel where they do this all the time. When you build housing, I think you have to think about what is the social dividend to the community. If I am lucky enough to have this house, what can I give back? And I know Matt's Kentala Avenue is a really wonderful example of that. Obviously, the work that Luke's doing is great as well in terms of having that dividend of giving something back. And so there are lots of ways that you can do that by thinking about that occupation of the house over time. How can it kind of open up to the community? How could it have different ways of being occupied over time? How do we connect with each other? How do we do density in ways that we can be good neighbours that might allow for other people to afford to buy in certain neighbourhoods? So, and I think kind of being generous in some ways. I think having that conversation with developers is one I keep trying to have, is that if you are making money out of developing land, which really is stolen land, what are you giving back in return for that? What is the dividend to the neighbourhood and to the community? And I think those are conversations that we need to keep pressing forward with, instead of kind of being at the mercy of developers.
Yeah, that's a lovely thought. I agree with you. I think that the transaction from creating some wealth out of the land and kind of everyone shares is very very apt. There's a lot happening in this particular arena right now with the Housing Summit and the Roundtable. And one of the legislative changes that have happened is that granny flats can now sort of be more viable for housing for people other than those related, and that has to do with a change in the definition of the household. I think everyone on this panel is going to have an opinion, right? And I'd love to hear what those are. So Take it away, panel.
Granny flats are something I've done quite a lot of, and I've had councils actually check. They'll come and see that it is actually at least a relative, if not a granny. I mean, it's unbelievable. And not really sustainable. I mean, granny flats are a great idea, but grannies have a use-by date. And what are you supposed to do when that one finishes? And clearly there is an opportunity for people. But you can all do it. All that co-housing stuff is terrific stuff, but you can also come from the other direction as well. Everybody with their own house can do that. My recent job I did for my youngest ever clients, in order to afford the house, they made their house a share household. And they took a 2-bedroom house, and instead of making it just for that couple, they added space so they have 2 tenants. And it's a great place for the tenants to live, but it's helping them to pay it off. But it's been designed in such a way that it can be like that for a period of time. And then as they move through into being a family, they can move. My clients live downstairs in a slightly larger area, but then they can move upstairs with children and have somebody living downstairs and maybe take over the whole thing, and then it can move to so there's all those stages of life. So it's not just a granny flat, it's just a house in such a way that it can actually accommodate more people in a good way and a communal way. And that was done as from an individual point of view. So it's great to come from both directions with that. Yeah.
We look at those enduring models of the Queenslander, and I mean the adaptability of that to be able to. I mean, we've probably invariably had an experience of some of us living in a Queenslander at some point, and you're living there with maybe 10 other housemates or something like that. They're a really enduring model. Now you look at the model of sort of predominant housing that's being made these days. Is that going to have the same sort of level of kind of adaptability and the like? I don't know, maybe not. I don't think so.
Yeah, adaptability is key. Anything, yeah.
I mean, I think it's the horse had already bolted. It's already happening, isn't it? You know that. We know that. I live in an inner city suburb in Brisbane where houses are a certain price. I don't think people in Brisbane earn those salaries, so most of them are dual occupancy unofficially. And so it's sort of policy in reaction to stuff that's already happening. And I know councils were auditing, you know, if you kind of go to open houses over the weekends, most of the houses in my neighbourhood have got 2 kitchens and 2 laundries. And so I think that's already happening. I just think that there are smarter solutions, and I think architects have it, you know, that we could be pushing those ideas forward. I think we have to be careful once it becomes legislated. You look to the US, so places like Portland in Oregon Oregon and Portland and also in California, where once they legislated the granny flats, it actually pushed housing prices up. And so I think that's why it's been such a kind of difficult decision for governments to make. And I think we need architects at the table coming forward with, you know, some of the design work by the panel, everyone sitting here, so that we can get new housing models that are desperately needed.
Yeah, granny flats in the backyard is definitely an option and could be quite creative.
There's some models in Europe that this is more smaller house, kind of multi-residential sort of thing, where they actually provide just the shell of a building and they give you plumbing, and you can then fit out the apartment if it's a studio or a 2-bedroom apartment or whatever. So you can then fit out as you wish, and it's not a finished kind of end product. But you can't do that here because 1, legislation, and 2, banks won't finance an unfinished product. But that's a really interesting way of which, I know, younger people might be able to kind of get a toehold in the market. But look, it's a system, and how do you kind of work within that system? It's tricky, yeah.
I love that idea, and the shell concept. I think if it has a sink, a toilet and a laundry, you would be okay with the legislation, but not with the banks. And I think the granny flat thing is also a lot to do with now the banks can make it official, which can open up funding, and sometimes funding is the block. Yeah, what about you, Luke? Any thoughts on that?
No, I have a lot of thoughts about this, but you just reminded me of something. We actually bought a house once, and before the bank inspected, we'd removed the kitchen. That was a bad move. So it turns out there are rules, and you should, you know, learn. And that's what these opportunities are about, you know. I think, and it just reminded me of another thing. I've got a Swiss client who doesn't understand why we have to fit the building out. And, you know, they keep telling me all these amazing things that they do about density and, you know, insulation and just a standard, better way of doing things for a longer future. And you're never really the owner forever, you know, and just that's the mentality. You're a part of a community and you're really building little communities and lots of them join together. And if you go to Switzerland, you see it. It's just a beautiful place. We don't build beautiful places like, you know, I think we have got so many opportunities to build beautiful place-making things, and a building like a little house is a big part of it, and how we relate to our community and what we're trying to build with a little house and you know, with co-housing and secondary dwellings, it's a big opportunity, I think, and we've seen it in two different ways recently. We thought about it as an asset for social housing providers that may have 17,000 houses on their books, and they've got an 80-year-old that wants to stay in that community because they're supported by the people in that community, which makes absolute sense. That fabric that they're not the architecture built, but their history, their you know, the semiotics of space. When they walk into that house, they remember all the stories of having their children there and everything like that. And all the things we know, we've experienced ourselves about staying in one place. And, you know, I don't know about you, but I've got two sets of grandparents that are still hanging around and they don't want to leave. They want to go out in a box. And it's because they have memories of a place, you know, and it's attached to a building. It's triggering for them. If we take the elderly person out of that community and don't provide potentially a secondary dwelling in that same lot and then put another young family in there that helps take care of them, you know, are we doing them a disservice? You know, so there's some really good opportunities there. Unfortunately, legislation's just taken so long to catch up. We were talking about these ideas 10 years ago, and I think it's a lot of your research and a lot of the examples of people here that have done it. So I think they're catching on.
Yeah, fantastic. Look, we're going to very shortly open up for some questions. I might just do like a quick broad brush of everyone to say, you know, what have you missed talking about? Or give us your magic one solution for the Housing Summit if you're at the table. And then we'll just see what the room wants to ask you, because I bet you there's 1,000 questions out there.
I'll start. We need good investment. We need government investment in housing, and we need kind of champions to lead the way. And I think architects are an important part of that role. And yeah, I'd love to see, and I think there are some exciting things that Queensland State Government are investing in with housing, and I can't wait to see how the flow-on effect of that in terms of housing quality in Queensland.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think there's an awful lot can be done in that field, and I think there's some simplicity in how that is dealt with. I think that whole conversation about building in backyards is a little bit scary, because as somebody who's always looked at smaller footprints so you can have more nature around you, the idea that you start building granny flats and taking that up, so you've got to have simple ways of making that happen in a way that doesn't destroy what else is going on as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It's not a very mature model yet, and we're just casting a thing over the top. And certainly I don't have the best examples. I think we've been struggling to get the planning arrangements just to do it, let alone to get a really good arrangement like we teach our second-year students, where we have some better planning arrangements between neighbours and things. So we've got courtyard spaces and, you know, really sophisticated, more Sri Lankan things from 2,000 years ago. That'd be great, but we're not allowed to do them. So I think, though, the planning guys like Peter Nelson and other people like that in state government are really pro-architects, and they've seen the benefits, and they've worked with Logan, Gold Coast and Brisbane, and they're really pushing the way. And the other thing I'd say is there's a lot of architects I've worked with who happen to be scientists or gone on to be engineers, and we've now planted them in these big organisations and in government, and they're coming back changing legislation. So there's some of the ideas being in a feedback loop, which we're seeing from a lot of the research you're doing as well.
I reckon unlocking the fence, that's the kind of critical, and the power, like the potential of our suburbs. As we've seen, COVID's forced the hand around working from home. Our suburbs have really become they've become now really kind of key parts of not just to live, but to work. And the more you see more your neighbours more because they're working from home or they're putting the bin out, when otherwise they'd be going to work at 7 o'clock for the commute or whatever it might be. And the fence becomes a territory that divides those spaces. So the fence, unlocking that, becomes opportunities for shared spaces and the like. You still need privacy. You still need to sit in the courtyard and get away from your neighbour if you need to. But yeah, I think that's my
Yeah, no,
little
that's lovely. And
low-hanging fruit.
yeah, the low-hanging fruit, exactly. I think the suburbs do offer a lot of opportunity for, some beautification and removing those fences and maybe getting the house a little bit closer to the street so you can almost kind of wave at your neighbours. And look, architects are already very much in the space of the city and the bigger buildings, so it is kind of a, an area that I'm excited to bring us into. And from what I hear in the research is that, people are mostly afraid that the design won't be good. And we do have our own industry to blame, but I think architects could get in there and sort of set some good examples. So that was what I would love to launch out there with some questions. So I'm not sure if there's a roving mic or whether you just, yes, there is. Jemima has it. And just raise your hand if you, two of them.
Good evening. I guess my thoughts are around getting back to the topic at hand, like the good design with without the deep pockets. And Kirsty, you might be able to answer this in terms of getting this to the masses. Talking about making a proper change. It's great having you guys, architects, being able to work with individual clients, but it's project builders, being able to get good design into there. And I'm not saying that, Metricon's designs aren't great, but I'm sure there's lots of room for improvement. But how do you, to make real change? I see it at that sort of level, especially Matt. You're talking about suburbs, and I'd be trademarking that phrase, unlocking the fence, because I think it's great. But once you start creating these suburbs that are getting built, to be able to get that culture, that vibe back into it, when you've got project builders going out and smashing out repetitive designs that aren't great designs, then you've got a whole suburb that's now locked away for 30 years until those buildings fall over and have to get rebuilt, right? How do you get to that mass market? And, there's obviously baby steps along the way, but maybe some of your research has thought about that.
You know that last scene of Fight Club where he explodes all the banks? That's where we need to start. But that's an exaggeration. But it has to start with the system, and the banks are probably the biggest barrier, because if we continue to value houses, as I'm saying, by the number of bedrooms and bathrooms, we're not talking about quality. We're not talking about sustainability. We're not talking about human health. We're just talking about numbers. And I'm sure we'll look back on this time and just think it's so silly that a 4-bedroom house gets you $150,000 more than a 3-bedroom house, or, that's just a ridiculous way to measure the value of housing. So I think that's the big thing that has to shift. But actually, Amy, I think you've got lots of expertise in this area.
Well, I do. I mean, I didn't expect to be put on the spot, but, it is about putting good examples out there, and it's about experimenting. And planning regulations do make it difficult to experiment, but I think we've all worked around that and experimented to so that we can show some great things, how to make smaller houses and bring density in gently. And also a topic we haven't talked about here, and it does have to do with the banks, and that's sort of the Soho, where a home might be able to generate a little bit of income, and therefore you've got that resilience, so that if you lose your job or something, you don't have to kind of sell the home to pay the mortgage. So there's that as well. But I agree with you.
I mean, we go back 60, 70 years ago, post-war period, Lend-Lease and all the kind of big developers, A.B. Jennings and that at the time, were engaging and using architects. I mean, around Carlingford, Western Sydney and Melbourne, all the merchant builder projects, homes were, and they still have currency today. They still perform really, really well climatically, do all the things we've been talking about. And that was at a mass market kind of level. That disappeared. I don't know the answer for that. And anecdotally, I know of architects that have sort of dipped their toe into trying to work with project home builders. There might be someone from a project home builder here. Feel free to chime in on this. But my understanding is the kind of model is geared towards ensuring that the plans are so ordinary that people have to make changes, and that's where the money the money's made. So yeah.
Okay, so
sure.
you just reminded me of a project that Lendlease asked us to do. So a big developer, an architect that used to work for me, started working for them, and they realised, what you need is an architect. So they brought an architect in, and really it was her ideas, and her idea was a better brief. And they just weren't asking the right questions. It's like about, what's affordable, what's sustainable. And so they said, well, why don't we design from the scratch up? Like, what should a lot look like, and how does it relate to the neighbours, and how does it relate to the street? And so why don't we use better landscape architect from the outset of the whole thing? They couldn't get rid of the fence yet. It blew their mind. However, we did a little market garden thing and connect to the street, so it was super low maintenance. And the idea was the most affordable, most sustainable, from an energy point of view and social point of view and cost point of view, house in a greenfield suburb in the middle of nowhere. In fact, the builders called it Middle Earth because it took so long to get there. But aside from that fact, it was quite an interesting little design. But what we did discover was it was all those little things we were talking about. We're facing the sun, and it was using the materials better, and it was working with the client with a better brief, and it's all those things you get taught in your work in your undergrad years as an architect, And the design, it looked a lot like what we used to do in second, third year with architects. It was really simple. All the solutions are in there. And it was the most affordable house in that development, and it was the highest NATAS rating they've ever had in the suburb, which was interesting because all the other builders were complaining about getting to these, and it was zero thresholds and all of that. Clear story windows, nice light, rake ceilings throughout, and it was affordable. And the other builders really just didn't believe it, so I had to drag them through. Because they've just never done building like that. It's been a long time. So anyway.
What was the outcome?
We've got a series of them going, but they said that's fine, but you've got to fund them as you go. So we've been funding them with state government or grants or private money, or occasionally when we pretend like it's a sales centre for a while and make it into a house later, things like that, or convince them that it's an economic model around NDIS, SDA housing and convert it, spend a bit more money and make it more accessible. But so there's a business model around it because, they are business people in the end.
I hear a common theme of creativity here. And actually, in answer to your question too, it's maybe getting more architects into those as valuers. Is it working in the banks? Philip always said everyone that's trained as an architect, might not necessarily end up being as an architect, but that training is just, it gives you the propensity to understand the value of the good design. So that's one answer. And any other questions?
A story/question. Kind of got lost on the weekend and accidentally ended up at North Harbour at Burpengary East, and a lot of project homes out there, and we were beguiled by the sign at the front that said $50,000 of extras for just $5,000, and this was the same house that had back-to-back TV rooms. Anyway, so my question is very much like the first one that was asked of you, is, and you've kind of come back with, there needs to be change at such a systemic and in a place where architects and architecture isn't at the forefront. My other little story is there was only one job I ever wanted when I was a kid, and that was to be an architect, and I grew up at Noosa in the 80s. My parents said to me, do you know how many unemployed architects we know? So I didn't do it. I became an economist. But are you training people in your courses about project finance, about banking, about regulatory change, not what the regulations are, but how to be an advocate for the industry so that we aren't just saying, there needs to be change, but there is a roadmap for change that we're all partaking of. And my partner, he loved the houses out at North Harbour, and we sped out of there real fast.
I think that's great. I think look, we need to train them. We are, Matt's teaching as well, we are really constrained in our architecture degrees by our registration requirements. At QT, we do have a lot of students who do double degrees in business, and that brings in a lot of new knowledge and insight for us as academics as well. It's really great. But I think I'm currently sitting on an expert advisory panel with Toowoomba Regional Council, and it's a cross-disciplinary panel. So we have economists and we have experts and community stakeholders. I think landscape architects. But the great thing about that is the economists always. I'll walk in with a brief for those panels, and as soon as the economist speaks, everything I was going to say is wrong. And I think that's great to have that kind of, that we do need to have more of those cross-disciplinary or transdisciplinary conversations that we're not having enough, that we have to stop architects just talking to architects, because it just opens up so much more conversation. And I think.
And just on the project home, I get it. It's cheap. People need a roof over their head at times, and that's a way they got to do it. So it's relatively.
The other thing is project home. You can go and see one. When you go to an architect, it's a huge leap of faith because they're showing you a drawing, and you've got to believe that that's it. And so that's
and to design something or getting back to that kind of client model, like they're coming to you that half the time. They don't know me, I don't know them, and they're putting the biggest investment they're ever going to do in your hands. It's a huge leap of faith, which is pretty.
Can I tell you a story for your partner? I did a quite intricate renovation on a tiny site in Paddington in Brisbane years ago, and wasn't cheap for what they did, but it was very, very, very carefully designed. And not long after they'd finished it, they went to a christening of a friend's at Bridgeman Downs, to an enormous house that had cost about the same as their renovation. And the husband and wife, they didn't say anything. They looked at each other when they first got there in this house and, have we done the right thing? And when they came home, after having been in the house for a couple of hours, they looked at each other and said, yes, we have. And one of the things they noticed was there were a lot of photographs on the wall of the family, and they felt that the only way these people could make the house theirs was to put their photos all over the house, because there was no personality. So it was interesting to actually spend the time in there and compare it.
Well, maybe the house was so big that's the only time they could see their family.
Remind themselves what they look like.
But 100%, we need to bring more people from other disciplines under the tent to have these discussions. I agree. Yeah.
And it is terrific that our national president is actually highlighting this. This is a new, very big change, which is terrific.
Yeah, I love it that she's saying that.
Yes, sometime.
I was thinking, I think you've inspired me. Like, we're trained to talk the structural design, the structural language and design the engineering, but not actually do it. But we know how to talk to the structural engineers. I think that's all we need to the training in architecture needs to be to how to instruct, how to brief the valuers, how to brief the banks, how to brief, even the homeowners of how to construct the finance. For instance, your shell model. Well, that might ultimately be the nicest house because you can get the expertise to help you through the planning process, which is very complicated, and the shell design and tick all the regulatory boxes, and then you can kind of do your own block, so to speak, and do the interior. And therefore work on it for longer and maybe spend a little bit more because you get something on special. I think there's a lot of innovative ways to that design, which is a lot of creativity and problem solving, can, bring that sort of economic balance. And yeah, you're all looking for us to help out with that. But as the president's hat on, I'm actually going to be looking for you guys to shout loudly about your great architectural designs where they have actually improved in value and your health, your comfort, and your community. And we still have a couple of minutes now. We have a couple more questions. Thanks.
Hi. I thought tonight you might be addressing to some of the types of materials that can be used for good design without deep pockets, both for the initial build and for ongoing maintenance, and also some of the ways you can orient buildings so that you get cross breezes and use of the sun for direct heating or heat storage with storage walls within the buildings. I've seen some of that in Canberra many years ago. I'm not sure exactly what my question is, except if anybody wanted to address some of that, because I know there are some exciting fabrics that we can start to import from other countries. I don't think that we're making that many in Australia, but maybe somebody on the panel has something that they could excite us with?
I just thought about one thing when you mentioned walls that store heat or spaces that store heat. So that most affordable, sustainable house we built for Lend-Lease recently, it had a trom wall, and it was something that I'd not really seen used a lot in Australia, but we, and the metrics around it were weird.
Might need to explain it, just 2 seconds.
Well, yeah, we dumped it down as much as we could so we could make it affordable, and it was just effectively using bricks on the inside of a house and then FC sheet on the outside of the house and then solar loading it in winter and then hiding it in summer. And the floor was all polished, which is an interesting thing because when we showed it to the state government as an example of a social house, an affordable house, they said, oh no, we can't have polished floors, it just doesn't fit. Weird. There was like, yeah, strange. It fits Paddington, not social housing apparently. But it means that you can use the earth-bonded slab as a heat sink. It's a free battery. It'll store more energy than a Tesla battery in a day for sure with the sun when you want it to. And then during the night, it'll passively release that heat in winter. And then in summer, it does the opposite. It becomes heat sink completely and keeps the house generally around between 20 or so degrees to 24 degrees. So anyway, there's lots of really interesting ways you can do that. And I guess we all know these things, so we don't think to talk about them too much.
What I would say is you do need to be a bit careful with the idea of importing some high-tech sustainable solution. A lot of it is much more low-tech. It's what's already here, and they're the things that you can be more sure will work. And that the reverse brick veneer, that's always the thing, brick veneer houses are the wrong way around. The brick's on the outside, the timber. And so a lot of brick veneer houses are already there, but what we then do is put a batten on the outside of the brick and put another cladding on top of it so you can actually reverse it round again. So there are simple devices you can do for that. But there are also orientation things, coming back to that sort of thing about getting the sun from the right direction. But you've really got to look at that with the site. If you've got a particular site in Toowong where there's a high-rise building being built there and there's a 7-metre high wall along the northern boundary of the site, so you have to be a lot more careful about trying to get sun into various places. So there's different ways you can deal with it. But there's always those issues of cross-ventilation is very important, natural light isn't very important, and that's all part of the good design issue. And notwithstanding, it is good to look at some technology, lighting and so forth we can do with much lower energy than we used to. And it's an ongoing field. But anything new, you have to be a little bit careful about what the true background is. Yep.
Just be mindful of privacy as well. Like, it's fine to open a whole lot of windows to the north because you've got to balance access to northern light and that. But if you've got a neighbour overlooking into you, you're going to end up having the blinds shut all the time. So how do you kind of find the happy medium between privacy, so you're not living in a fishbowl, and two, so we find that's a really critical thing to kind of unlock and resolve that as well.
And really exciting every time you do it to make it work. Problem solving is so exciting.
I might just jump in because I do know of an innovative material in working with the home energy management systems with Economic Development Queensland. It's like if you know your little pats of butter, how they kind of melt when you leave them in the sun, and then if you put them in the fridge, they go hard. Well, there's a phase change material which is a bit like bubble wrap with that kind of butter inside them, if you will, to imagine. And what that is for when you're dealing with something like the eco village where you don't have a slab, which is such a perfect opportunity. You can put that on a wall, and with an air conditioner, which is maybe blasting during the daytime when the sun is actually powering it, it can help you with your phase change. So, and that's kind of from NASA apparently, but it's here, and it's kind of one you might not have heard of. So that's my little 2 cents worth.
Yeah. Well, these are all great, and I mean, there's so many examples here to look at. I have the great pleasure of writing about lots of architects' houses for magazines, and like John Elway, who's an architect in Brisbane, the way that his houses are designed, you have this kind of, they're quite picturesque. You kind of walk around and you just see the interior, and then you get outside and it's clad with custom or some really low kind of cost material, but the way the walls are insulated, the way he designs a space so that you're kind of guided through it, you would never know that that's a low cost, low maintenance material because the design kind of takes you on this wonderful journey. And so I think that's the benefit of architecture is you can get away with anything because the design will kind of encapsulate you within that space. Yeah.
We can squeeze in one more question and then we'll have to wrap up. Or if there's, okay, one.
It's a question around affordability, I guess, and wondering what your thoughts are around prefabrication, more prefabrication opposed to modular, and how that could provide affordability. And I guess it's been done a lot, but what potentially has to change to make that more mainstream?
We're doing a lot with this, and the reason we're doing it is not for that affordability element, although it does impact that. So there's sort of three ways of thinking about it. One is that as soon as you start doing that and you get repetition, your affordability immediately from buying power becomes so great, but also your safety levels become so much more controllable that the job outcomes for us become the reason we do it. So if there's a house, I think about it as a panellised or a modular form, and off-site built and built where we need the job outcomes, or where they've got a crime issue, or where we've got DV victims and their kids and we're trying to get a young mum a job, you know. So we'll build a house to get a job outcome, and we'll do it in that form. But what we find is when we do it in a panelised form, where we're thinking about modules of buildings and things, you know, when the panel comes to us, I'm not chucking 30% of it away. Which we, you know, does it bother you that you see these big developments and you see all this waste out the door? And then you walk down the street of the main drag of Brisbane somewhere, and there's a kid on the street. You know, why don't we just join all these dots? You know, so they're the sort of things where those things can make an enormous impact. It's good design, and there's good spaces that can be made about them. And that more affordable, sustainable house that we did for Lendlease was a slab on ground, but it was also panelised. So it was prefab for the most part, and it was a 6-week delivery. Try and get that out of, you know, a big developer. It's definitely a way forward. And people are looking at investing in it.
And it does need that economy of means to make it work. If it's a one-off house, it's more expensive, hands down. And we've looked at SIPs and GULAMs and all sorts of different systems previously, but they just don't stack up on an individual level. But you roll that out at a project home or that sort of level, there's definitely efficiencies. The other things just to be mindful around that is just little things you learn along the way in terms of fittings and electrical points and all that sort of stuff. All that has to be in prior to it arriving on site. So if anything you got to add later, it's got to be exposed, conduit and things like that. So it's less kind of adaptable with some of those kind of elements in terms of having something for longer and being more adaptable. So just things to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's hard to get that thermal mass, but if you know, we've been playing with that a little bit as well with advanced concrete. So coming back to different materials. I don't really like using it, and this was something I just mentioned to Jeremy. We all agree on this, I think, is every building has a lifespan. And what are we going to do with these things? Are we going to create a mountain of solar panels one day that we can't use anything? So designing for disassembly and designing for reuse is almost the first step. So whatever we use, we've got to figure out what we've got to get rid of. And with modular stuff as well, some of the things we've been looking at is if we're putting it together that way, the first step is, we should use adhesives or laminate or SIPs or whatever. And yeah, these modern methods of construction are super high performance from an energy rating or an engineering point of view, but what do you do with it later? And there's no pathways, you know. I don't want to try and explain to my 8-year-old kid who says, what are we going to do with this later? Because he's already on to me about every vegetable peel there is, you know. So, like, you know, he's on to me about what I waste in the garage, you know. So when we do this on a job site, he's already, you know, so we're trying to get that sort of thinking in our household. And so when I do that in the buildings, I guess that's what I'm really worried about. But yeah, and just in the numbers, we know the numbers pretty well. If you're doing mass manufactured housing, 20 is your number. If you can get 20, you can kind of do it. We've done 20 really high-end ones and 20 kind of low-end ones. We can make those numbers work both ways. But for the big manufacturers, if you want Hutchies to do it, it's kind of like hundreds, you know, and 500 or 1,000, depending on kind of the complexities you want, because it takes a lot more of our thinking to do this. You build it, you unbuild it, you put it back in a truck. You can't be building this building 5 times. So you want to make it work because it costs us a lot of money to think about. But yeah, it can work.
All right. I've come to the point in time where I'm going to ask everybody to, use that precious 30 seconds that they each have left to try and maybe, say some kind of pearls of wisdom in summary. And maybe we'll start with you, Kirsty. You look ready.
Yeah, right. Oh, hang on. Well, I would just, to carry on with that point, we are about to be hit by a tidal wave of prefabricated housing in Australia, by people like Lendlease in particular, and Hutchies and so forth. And we need more architects to be involved with modern methods of construction desperately, so that we make sure that that is design-led and that we get good quality design outcomes. And that is probably one of the big key levers that will see well-designed housing being much more accessible. So if you're an architect, go home and start looking at prefabrication and modern methods of construction, please.
I'm always suspicious of prefabricated housing, because people have tried to do it forever, and they seem to have it working, and then they don't. And I think the idea of Queensland has been moved around the state. It's not actually a new idea in a way, and there's actually quite a few houses there that get demolished that shouldn't get demolished. They should just get moved. So there's a history of that. I think the main thing we all have to do is just be realistic about what we can and can't do, and we need to just use less, and everything we design should be more efficient. I think that's the main point that we can make.
Yeah, I'd just like to tell you how I live. We reuse whenever we can. We don't build things typically. We live in an old Queenslander that we adapt, and we tried to live with my parents. They left. I blame my boys. And we just make small moves. So we change hinges on doors, and we do all the things, like we love doing, the littlest moves possible, mainly because I'm tight. And then my wife loves that too, because she likes to save money. So it works because we get to have those little experiences with parents, and those little opportunities where we can have people stay, or we can live in New Zealand for a little bit and have friends come over, because we've got these adaptable, bigger houses. But you can do it with little places too. And learning to live with lots of kids running around and still have a Soho, what we're finding is the memories and the place-making opportunities with that building has become so much. I'm not sure what the house is worth to anybody else anymore, but it's worth a lot more to me. And I'm sure, every Queenslander you go past that you've lived in, that 10 share house that you had in wherever it was, Red Hill or somewhere, there's some memories of place that you're just, it's just attached to that building. And if you ever see it demolished, you're terrified, So there's a lot more to buildings than I ever wanted to know about becoming an architect. And then you become one, you can't unlearn this stuff. It kind of drives you a bit mad. But doing that and living with a Queenslander, we've lived upstairs, we've lived downstairs, and the heat sink and the thermal mass, for all the cost to the environment, honestly, it's an amazing way to live, but especially when you've got a house above you, where most of these other places don't have that insulated benefit. So there's a lot of really interesting reuse of buildings we should look at, and maybe, how you could adapt, reuse, and rethink your existing spaces and materials and things like that could be, it's an easy win.
There's a really great resource by Breathe Architects. Go on their website, have a look. It outlines a whole lot of materials that are sustainable, made locally, so there's less embodied energy, reasonably well, have longevity. It's a full-blown kind of document. That's my advice. Have a look at that. That's good. It's good.
That's perfect. And I'll add one in. I think we need some smaller households. Opportunities for smaller household homes would be great. And gardens are so important, and they don't necessarily need to be big, but they need to be there, and they need to be planted early. And we sometimes forget in the affordability formula to get those plants in the ground. So with that, I would like to thank everyone. I know Philip will jump up and do that more formally, but it's great people, great conversations, and I hope that we'll do a little bit more of that around the couple of refreshments. Thanks.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You were promised a fantastic panel, and look, weren't they amazing? There's just so many ideas that have come forward today. A really expert and, in fact, incredibly insightful panellists. It's been so lovely to hear people talking about the modesty of small spaces and the idea of living smaller as well. Sometimes I wonder if the horse hasn't bolted that where we hear houses being talked about as homes, where people value the experiences of those places, the history of those places and so on. Valuing places as homes is very different from valuing places as commodities. And when you can negatively gear, 10, 15 properties, it's the economics of all of that that has skewed the market post-war enormously. This is a fairly modern phenomenon. It wasn't around so much before when I was growing up. So I think in some respects we have a real challenge. It's more about legislation and being very clever about how we deal with finance legislation and the procurement of property. That's where the skills have to be, not so much really architects necessarily being in the room. Yes, it'd be lovely to have architects in the boardrooms where those discussions occur, but we have to find a political way, and everyone's too gutless at federal level at the moment to do anything about negatively gearing. So therefore, properties and the skewed marketplace we have at the moment is always going to be a problem. So until that's addressed, we won't find that we're really going to make a big difference. But I think you've been entreated tonight to some fantastic information and insights from a spectacular panel. I must congratulate you all. Would you please congratulate them again and thank them? And Amy, thank you for being such an amazing moderator. Amazing. Just a couple of ads, I think, next. We've got Ask an Architect. There are still a few places available. A handful of bookings are left, and that's an opportunity to have a free 20-minute session. I probably want to go on for a lot longer than 20 minutes, you'd find, once you start talking with an architect, or they won't stop talking to you. So at least there's that coming up. The sustainable design, Amy will be involved in that, I think. Is that? Oh, no, sorry. No, you're not. You're another one. Sorry. as if you didn't have enough to do. That's at Corner Block on the weekend at 11 o'clock on both days. There's the opportunity for a Q&A on sustainable design. And the Yani Yenyin Buyer on Sunday, which is an Indigenous perspective on on the relationship between our First Peoples and the rivers and country of this region. Now, there's a bar at the back of the room. It is a cash bar, but I'm sure you'd like the opportunity to speak with some of our panellists tonight. So I think that's the last of the ads, except make sure you've got the app. Probably most of you do have the app at the moment, but if you don't get onto it, it does help you organise yourselves with places you might see, especially in the self-guided tours that you might do on the weekend. And the tote bag, make sure you get one of those. They're $20, but it's just fantastic graphics by Claudio Chirac. And you can get those here at the back of the room as well. So thank you, everyone, for coming along. You've been a great audience, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Open House over the weekend. Thank you.